What's happening, folks? Rouge again, and today we're talking about the carrying capacity, and later on we're going to talk about another topic called succession. Let's get into the carrying capacity first. So what the carrying capacity is, it's the maximum amount of individuals that an ecosystem can support. So if you were to think about a classroom, there's only enough textbooks for 34 students. That's the most amount of students that I could have in my class. I just don't have any resources or space. And because of that, I'm only limited to that number of students maximum, okay? So that's what a carrying capacity is, the maximum number. The things that keep a population from reaching or going past a carrying capacity are called limiting factors. Limiting factors are natural resources that limit the size of the population. So for example, if we're talking about my classroom, a limiting factor would be space. It could be the number of textbooks. It could be the number of pencils, the number of seats, the number of desks. In ecology, here's some examples of actual limiting factors that we see. It could be a lack of food. It could be sunlight. Too much or too little sunlight could limit the growth of populations of certain plants. Too many predators, a lack of shelter, lack of mates. And here's one that most people don't think about, even diseases. So if you have a high number of individuals that are in close proximity to each other, that are very, very close, they're more likely to spread bacteria and viruses. And they're more likely to spread diseases that could dwindle the population down. And something like that actually happened in the human population, and I'll show you that in a moment. So there's two types of growth that we see in a population. The first type is called exponential growth. Exponential growth is when the population is unchecked. What that means is the population hasn't encountered any limiting factors. Eventually they will, okay? But when we see exponential growth, there's a faster and faster rate of growth, okay? Next we have logistical growth. Logistical growth is when the population is checked. The population has met some limiting factors, okay? Now, the way these two graphs look, if we were to graph the number of individuals over time, and we see exponential growth, the growth would look like this. And I want you to add this to your notes, please. It would go up, and it would get faster and faster and faster, and then we would see this curve which shows exponential growth. We call this curve a J curve. Okay, please add that into your notes. There's nothing that's stopping that population from growing out of control, okay? And we typically see this with bacteria or like simple insects like flies, okay? Things that just reproduce quickly. Now, logistical growth, we see a different pattern. It starts off exponential. It starts growing faster and faster and faster until it meets some of these limiting factors. And after it meets those limiting factors, it starts to plateau, okay? So since it meets the limiting factors and levels out, this would be the carrying capacity. This would be the maximum number of individuals that environment can support, and we call this an S curve. Okay? The J curve shows exponential growth. The population is unchecked. The S curve shows logistical growth. The population has met its carrying capacity. It's met limiting factors, okay? So here's what it looks like. We have our J curve, and it continually goes upward. That's exponential growth. We have our S curve. It starts to go up, 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 and then it starts to level out. That area where it levels out, that's called the carrying capacity. About 23 to 24 in this area. 23 to 24, right here. That's the maximum number of individuals that ecosystem can maintain. Now, realistically, what it looks like, you'll see fluctuations, but it'll stay around that area, okay? It'll stay around there. And that's logistical growth. There are limiting factors keeping the population in check, okay? If we look at this graph, this shows the human population growth over the past 2 to 5 million years. And you can see that it's steadily going up, and it's going up, it's going up. And then all of a sudden we see this huge growth. Now ask yourself, based on human population, the history of the human population, does this look more like a exponential or logistical growth? And the answer is, it looks more like exponential, okay? If you look right here, right up at the top, you can see that it looks like it may be starting to hit its carrying capacity for the human population throughout the whole world. But we're not sure yet. We're not sure if we've met it, and I don't think we have. And if we look at the chart, you can see right here there's a dip in the population. That was from the Black Plague. The Black Plague actually took out about one-third of the humans living on Earth, okay? And why that happened was there was a lot of people and there was a lot of transportation. And that disease was spread through fleas, which would be on mice or rats, and those rats would get transported through ships. So as we came in contact with more and more individuals in more and more countries, the Black Plague was spread. Now we've overcome that limiting factor because we've have cures and treatments and medicine and that kind of technology. So we were able to go past this limiting factor, okay? Let's talk about ecological succession now. This is a little bit different, but what ecological succession is, it's how life comes back after a disturbance, okay? So if we take a look at this picture, the forest there, must have taken generations and generations and generations to be established. All of a sudden there's a fire and it just totally disrupts everything that was going on in the forest. Succession, let me write that out. Succession is how does life come back after a disturbance. So there's two types. I repeat, there are two types of succession. The first one is called primary succession. And what primary succession is, it's how life comes back in a lifeless area, okay? There's no life there. In fact, I want you to add this to your notes too. There's not even any soil. There's no soil for plants to grow, okay? What ends up happening is, so let me explain real quick. We would have volcanoes. It'd be after a volcanic eruption, and that molten lava would totally destroy everything, and it would cover all the soil, and it would harden into rock. Now, how we get life back is we have what's called pioneer species. Pioneer species are the first species to enter an area. In this case, we're talking about lichen and mosses, okay? So what will happen is that lichen and moss, it'll actually start to grow on the volcanic rock. It'll grow on there. And what will happen is three different things will help to reconstitute the soil. The first one is the lichen and moss. They're very acidic. And that acidity starts to break down the minerals of the rock, okay? The second thing is we'll have some weather erosion. Through the weather erosion, over time, it'll start to break up that rock as well. And lastly, we'll have, as this moss and lichen dies and decays, their remains will contribute to more soil, okay? And we'll go over that in just a moment. Eventually, as we get the lichens and moss, their remnants will help to contribute to more soil. We'll get some grasses. As that grass dies off, that'll contribute to more soil. We'll get some shrubs. As the shrubs die, that'll contribute to more soil. We'll get some trees. And you guys get the picture. The trees will die off. Their remnants will contribute to more soil. We'll get a forest and eventually what's called a climax community. What a climax community is, it's when the community is stable. It's mature, stable. There's lots of biodiversity, meaning there's lots of different life there, okay? And there's little change over time. The second type of succession is called secondary succession, and it's easy to identify the two. Primary succession has no soil present. Secondary succession has soil, okay? Soil is intact. Soil is present. And since there's soil that's present, it's much faster, okay? So let's see what this looks like. In primary succession, I believe this is Mount St. Helens, we'll have a volcanic eruption. That volcanic, lava will kill everything right here, and it'll eventually solidify into volcanic rock. Once there's volcanic rock, there's no life there. So there's no life on this volcanic rock, and then we start to get our pioneer species. In this case, it's the lichen and the moss. The lichen and the moss will grow on the volcanic rock. The acidity will help to break down those minerals. We'll also have weather erosion that will break down that mineral. That'll help to contribute to more soil. And lastly, when this lichen and moss dies off, their remnants will decay and also contribute to more soil. And here's what the progression looks like. We see bare rock to the pioneer species, which are lichen and moss. We'll see some small shrubs and small plants, and then we'll start to see our larger community, larger trees, larger life, and then we'll eventually see the climax community. Go ahead and take note on the 3 ways that soil is formed: acids in the lichen, natural weathering, and the growth and decay of the lichens and later organisms. Go ahead and put it on pause right there. And let's go into secondary succession. Secondary succession is much easier. It'd be something after like a fire. So after this fire, we can see shortly after, there's still life there. There's still soil. There's still plants. And over time, we'll see that there's slightly more. Okay, and I think this picture was taken about a year later. After the fire, it's the same area of the forest after the fire. But we can see there's starting to be more life and more growth. The trees are looking healthier. They're starting to get their growth back. Okay. Here's another picture. I believe this is after another fire, same location, and we can see that we're starting to get smaller plants and smaller shrubs to regrow in that area. Okay, and then eventually we'll get larger and larger trees. So we look at these 2 pictures. This right here would be primary, because we're starting off with bare rock. Over time, from that bare rock, we end up going to our climax community. This bottom picture is secondary succession, because after a fire, there's still going to be soil present, and then we'll go to our climax community from there. Okay. Primary succession, bare rock. Secondary succession, soil. Okay. That is it for today, folks, and I will see you all mañana.